First, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the staff for making this with all the math symbols. I want you to know it intimidated me as well. Narcissa and Colleen asked me to say something about my own community college background because I'm a product of the community college system. When I was in my early, when I was in my early 20s, a bit directionless, you know, I was a contract gardener and maintenance man for the Los Angeles Community College system. But I always loved numbers, because my mother used to do number games around the table. And during my lunch breaks at Los Angeles Community College, I would sit outside the temporary building, which I will bet 10 to 1 is still a temporary building. And I'd listen to Professor Stutzman's math class and just try to take notes with over my lunch. And Professor Stutzman saw the gardener outside taking notes in his class. He came outside about the third week and he asked me to come into the class and said I could eat my lunch there. And just an example of a person who's an exquisite human being, he told all the students that during that period they could eat their lunch in class because he knew that I couldn't do it unless I could eat my lunch then. And he graded my homework even though I wasn't enrolled in his class. And then the next year, he took me to see his cousin at what was then Valley State and got me a job as a math tutor and helped me transfer. And then he followed me all the way to UCLA, which led to Berkeley, my PhD, and so on. So there's been a lot of talk at this meeting about structural reform and fundamental finance changes in higher education. But in the end, it's individual faculty members who really care about students and guide them. And he created for me an image of a life I could have that I had no idea what was possible. I could not envision myself as an academic, as someone working in public policy or mathematics. And he just inserted in my head visions of what I could actually be. And that's what our institutions at their best could do. At his retirement, I still can't call him by his first name, professor, right? You know, this moment when you wake up for the first time in your life and you look in the mirror and you see your mother or your father's face, and it's sort of disorienting because we have this illusion that we all create ourselves as individuals. I remember the first time I got up in the morning really tired, I looked in the mirror and saw his face. So, community colleges at their best not only train people for particular jobs, but when they work, they can put in the heads of our students possible lives for themselves. So now, 45, 50 years later, I'm privileged to be at the Carnegie Foundation, leading the Dana Center, working on community college reform. And for the last 3 years, every other week, I've been visiting a community college and teaching for a day, 5 periods. And then the second day, meeting with governance members, with college administration, with faculty. And it's fascinating to see what's out there. Because when you speak to the presidents, they all describe their institutions in identical language, right? Language scales. But when you're on the campus, in the classrooms, you see how enormously varied these community colleges are. Some, South Texas College recently, Valencia, LaGuardia, Los Medanos, feel like community centers. And when you come into the classroom, the students say hello, and they ask who you are, and they know each other. And after class, when you go outside, students are hanging out and working. And other places, even though the description of their programs is identical, they feel like gas stations where students drive up, they get filled up, and they drive away. And you really can see how the leadership of these institutions, how the governance, how the community aspect of the place creates a life on these campuses that draws students to it when they're in trouble, rather than causes them to flee. The biggest surprise for me in visiting now 60 community colleges and teaching in them is how many extraordinary, there are islands of wonderfulness in almost every community college. There are 1 or 2 exceptions. I will not embarrass them. But in the great majority of community colleges, I see really elegant and important solutions to particular problems, and in almost no case did anyone other than that campus learn from those solutions. The fundamental problem that you need to work on now is the redesign of developmental education. Many of your campuses, 60%, 70%, some of you 90% of your students are coming in remedial tracks. And these programs are shaped more by the weight of history than they are by the needs of today's workforce or today's understanding of learning sciences. And if you work separately on these, you're not actually going to be able to make the kind of improvements that are needed. Because first, the goals of developmental education, which was created in the 1950s to remedy high school problems in the 40s and early 50s, are outmoded. I have sat with so many people who want to be firemen, policemen, who want to be EMTs and dental hygienists, interior designers, sitting in college algebra classes, factoring trinomials, doing this stuff, and rationalizing binomial surd denominators. How's that for terror? That has nothing to do with, even mathematicians don't respect. It's just this ancient little thing like Latin that we keep there, and I cannot stand that my discipline is a barrier to people's productive participation in society. Today, most students need statistics. They need statistics, data, they need how to learn from manuals, they need deep quantitative literacy, and the professional societies agree with this, but the weight of history and the isolation of our campuses allows us to keep perfecting systems that are effectively obsolete. Placement on most campuses is a criminal enterprise. I have interviewed students in orientation who sit at the end of a day and are taking a placement test, and they have no idea how consequential it is, whereas in other community colleges, students have to sign a disclosure that they've prepared for the test and know its consequences. Before anyone takes a placement test, students have a week of online practice with old tests to practice on, and it saves them more than a semester, in some cases a full year of developmental courses. But because everything is done locally, good ideas of good people do not spread in our sector of education. One of our roles in governance is to make sure that the structures are there that allow our institutions to improve, and this will require common solutions to common problems and structures for making that happen. I chair studies for the Department of Defense of mobility and military families, so I work a lot with our warriors. It's a littered landscape of lost credits. We have articulation agreements that are overly local in a highly mobile world, and on Campus X, one dyspeptic faculty math chair gets to decide what matters. Other places have worked out guaranteed transfer agreements. If they complete our core, it counts. We need to make it easier for our students to earn, to keep legitimately earned credits and build toward a life, a license, certificate, a degree that has labor market value. That will require your collective power, not just your individual influence. That requires this organization, not just your local ones, to work out national agreements that reflect a highly mobile society. Most of Dev Ed courses are taught by part-timers, 2/3 on some campuses, 90% on one campus I visited. Good people, good teachers, but with no responsibility for actually improving their programs. They're hired as contract people to teach a course.